Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking your time out in the middle of your day. My name is Holly, and my last name is Maserani, but you can just call me Holly. I come into this field doing restorative justice work mainly in the state of Maryland. For the last 10 years, I've been working doing nonprofit work. Mainly as diversionary options for juvenile offenders in the juvenile justice system, but I've also worked a lot with schools using restorative dialogue processes as alternatives to the more typical sort of disciplinary responses in the school setting, like suspensions and expulsions. So today I was hoping to share with you some of the basic principles of restorative justice and then restorative practices as they apply in the school setting. And this, full disclaimer, this is my first webinar, so I may miss some of the technical aspects of connection over this medium, but I'm really hoping that you all feel like you're able to participate as well. And so we're going to start out with an activity that I will invite you to participate in. This is kind of a thought experiment. So I'd like you to imagine that we're all on an island, on an isolated island. And I'm wondering, what sort of gifts you bring to our community that you'd like to contribute that would help us survive. So, like for instance, maybe you sing and you can provide us some music, or maybe you want to be the one who sews up all of our loincloths and body coverings, or maybe you're an awesome cook and you know how to make like coconut curry. So can each of you just maybe tell me your name and something that you feel like you can contribute to our island community? And you can do that via chat, I guess. Julie, is that the best way?
I think whatever people feel comfortable with. If you use the raise your hand icon, I can try to unmute you, and that's fine. Or if you just type in the question box, I'll be happy to read your answer for you.
Cool. So I will contribute. Well, I do like to sing, so I'll sing some songs when we're sitting around the campfire. Hopefully someone knows how to chop wood and start a fire.
I don't know how to chop wood, but I can start a fire, so I'm happy to do that. So you really enjoy cooking, and so I'd be happy to be our island cook.
Yay! Food and music. What else do we need?
I think we've got a quiet group today, so let's see. Okay. Stephanie says she loves to tell jokes, and she can contribute to us staying sane. Thanks, Stephanie.
Awesome. Okay, so some humor, very essential. Jokes, food, song, what else? Some survival skills.
I don't see anything else rolling in right now. So why don't we keep moving, and then please feel free to contribute as you think of what you'd like to contribute.
Okay, awesome. So we're all living on this island, and it takes a couple weeks for us to get up and running, but we're really, really happy. We're thriving as a community. If you can just imagine this, everyone's bringing their skills, and we're we've built our huts, and we're growing our food, and we have a really strong, close community, and really feels like paradise. We're thriving. And then one day, Shelby, who's one of our community members, comes running back to camp, and she's very distraught. And it's because she says that when she was just down at the beach, she noticed that she came out of the wood line and she saw that that Zelda and Dimitri were kind of like in the shallow water together. And first she thought they were just playing, but then she noticed that they were like kind of yelling at each other. And then it was kind of crazy. She's like, oh my God. And then you know, Dimitri threw Zelda down in the water, and then Zelda stood up and took Dimitri and dragged him out of the water and started punching him, and then he punched her, and then she punched him. She got him down on the ground and banged his head on a rock, and she thought she saw blood, and she's really, really, you know, Shelby just came running back to let us know what she saw. So I'm curious, what is your first reaction, you know, as a member of this community when you hear from Shelby about what she saw? What's your initial response?
So as we wait for folks to either type in or raise their hands, I guess my initial response is just fear that Dimitri, I think it was, is okay, that if he's bleeding or if his head has been injured, I mean, I'd be very concerned about just their health and well-being physically first.
Okay, great. What else?
Someone is saying that they would just be concerned if the folks are okay, and I think it was referring to Dimitri being okay.
Okay. What else is coming up for you when you hear this story?
Again, I think for me, it's if we were kind of living in this idyllic bubble, I think it would be very just upsetting to hear about two of our community members not getting along on such an escalated level.
So it sounds like we've got some worries about our individual members and how they've been possibly hurt physically, and then also just some worry about how that's going to affect the larger community. Like, what does this mean, right?
Yep, I don't see any more contributions at this moment.
Okay, so I bring this up as sort of a dramatic story just to illustrate, initially at least, that when we were talking about restorative practices and restorative justice, that it comes into play in very serious situations oftentimes, and that while the processes themselves are aimed at creating community and peace, it's about not only building a community of connection, but also how we respond when things go wrong. And so the question is, when situations like this happen, what does justice require? And so for the people harmed, right, that's Dimitri. We've heard, you know, some concern about how he is. Also for Zelda, you know, is she hurt too? And then for the community at large, how does it affect everybody? So what does justice require for Zelda, for Dimitri, and for our island community? And what we're talking about so far is internal processes, right? So we're not, I mean, I didn't hear anyone say, you know, grab Zelda and put her in a makeshift cage, right? Like, so we're not talking about external processes yet. Our initial response is worry, concern. What does this mean for our community and our relationships? So those responsible for causing the harm in situations like this typically will need to have some sort of accountability so they can have a chance to explain what happened and to try to make it right. Perhaps some encouragement to learn from what happened, so that it doesn't happen again? And how do they re-enter the community after they've caused so much harm? They have a need to be heard and respected and valued in spite of the mistake that they've made, some hope that they can re-enter the community, and perhaps, at least for some, there's some benefit for the safety of the community and for themselves to have some temporary restraint, perhaps until Zelda, calms down or whatever. Those harmed, Dimitri is going to need some safety, right? Knowing that he's not going to be hurt again, answers why, perhaps. He's probably going to want to know that the community is going to say, this isn't okay, what happened to you? And then some truth around what happened. Perhaps someone who's been harmed would also want some restitution or even vindication.
Holly, we lost you. Can you hear us? We're not hearing you. Oh, I think you might have muted yourself. Holly, are you back?
No.
Oh,
I am.
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I think we last heard you. You were talking about restitution.
Oh, okay. I don't know what happened. Okay. Sorry about that. So restitution for Dimitri could be just, some access to healing. It's really normal also to have maybe some desire for revenge, right? That's really normal too for someone who's been harmed. And also for him to have a voice in deciding what happens moving forward, having some power in that. This is very technology. Okay, here we go. And then as a community, I think most of us would feel worried about how this affects our community, right? And that we would feel like we were somehow victimized as well. The opportunity for us to heal as a community from this, and then really knowing that when things like this happen, that everyone involved has a voice and has an opportunity to take responsibility for their role and also to make it right. So, restorative justice is nothing new to humankind. It is somewhat new to the Western criminal justice legal system, and insofar as oftentimes, historically at least, disciplinary policies in schools have somewhat mirrored the response in the criminal justice system insofar as they can be punitive and exclusionary. Restorative justice is sort of the foundation for talking about restorative practices because it's the application of restorative justice principles in the school setting. And so how do communities respond to harm caused and experienced by its members? A lot of the restorative justice processes do come from traditional Aboriginal societies in communities where you rely on each other to survive. And so when something goes wrong, there are ways to figure that out that really have the aim of restoring the relationships of everybody involved. So these are the two links I'm going to send to Julie that we're not able to watch today, but hopefully you'll be able to access those on your own time. But the real fundamental paradigm shift between retributive justice and restorative justice is that in retributive or punitive systems, the questions are what rules have been broken, who did it, and what do they deserve, right? And restorative justice asks who has been hurt, what are their needs, whose obligations, and how do we collectively put things right? So it's much more focused on relationships. just a little sort of more drill down into that, is that in restorative justice, when harm is caused, it's defined as acts affecting humans' relationship and community, as opposed to, a violation of a law or a rule or an institution. The assumption in restorative justice is that individual choice is made in the context of a larger community and social context, not just an individual making a choice isolated from those things. In restorative justice, those that cause harm are held accountable, but they're held accountable directly to those that have been harmed in the community that's been affected, as opposed to in the criminal system and in many punitive systems where people who've caused harm are held accountable to the institution, and at least in the criminal justice system, the state steps in and as the victim. So that points to another real difference, is that people who've been harmed have a direct voice in restorative justice processes. So for instance, when I'm working in schools and we've had something serious happen, the person who's caused harm participates, as well as the person who's been harmed and their family and their supportive community of school and others. And so everyone has a chance to have a voice. Some of these underlying assumptions are that, in the retributive system, it's sort of like, if you do this, you'll get this negative consequence. And so that's assuming that we're driven by a fear of avoiding consequence, as opposed to, what's been shown as a much more powerful motivator, which is human desire to have strong connection and meaning and belonging with other humans. I've been through these other ones. So it's another question. I realize it might be harder for you all to answer, but I'm curious because you work in schools, and I'm sure you've experienced zero tolerance, and I'm just curious, what has been your experience with that as a policy? What do you think of it?
And I am happy to take anyone off of mute if you'd like to just share your answer verbally as opposed to typing, because I know I'm not a quick typer, and I'd always rather speak than type. So just raise your little hand icon, and I will take you off of mute, or if you prefer to use the question box to answer, please do that as well. And we'll give everyone a couple minutes just to gather your thoughts or type your answers in. Holly, maybe if you want to share some of your experience while people are gathering their thoughts, we can, allow them to listen and kind of gather their thoughts at the same time.
Yeah. My experience has mainly been coming in as an outside facilitator when schools have decided that an alternative process is going to be more effective than suspension or expulsion. Sort of this idea that, suspension really doesn't work when it's an interpersonal conflict, especially in the age of social media, when, going home doesn't mean that the conflict itself is even put on hold. It could be escalating, right? So insofar as my understanding of zero tolerance it mainly means sort of excluding those who make mistakes. The schools and the staff that I've worked with usually are coming to me because they want to try something different. But I am totally, open to hearing if other people have different experiences or if they've had similar experiences.
So I think we have one question, and let me see if
Okay.
I can access it. Let's see. Oh my goodness, I'm having some technology issues right now myself. Let me see if I can find it. Stephanie, do you think you can I unmute you and you ask your question, because I'm having a hard time getting to the question pane. Let's see. So Stephanie, I'm going to unmute you because I can't seem to get to your question. Stephanie, can you hear us? Stephanie? Let's see. Stephanie, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead and ask your question.
That wasn't really a question. I was just kind of answering the statement for her.
Yeah, please.
Under question box. And I was just saying that I've worked in schools where we've, had to apply the zero tolerance to students, but it's just harder when you have a relationship with a particular student. You have to make a decision, for the safety of the school and the safety of the other students in the school as well.
Great, thank you. Holly? Oh, Holly, you muted yourself again by accident.
Oh, okay.
Were you able to hear Stephanie?
It told me I was muted by you. I'm not sure if that happens automatically. Anyway, yeah. So what I'm hearing, Stephanie, is sort of this tension, this difficult decision. It's harder when you have a relationship with a student and you realize you need to make a decision for the larger group and the safety of everyone, and recognizing that that's harder when you have a relationship with a student, and maybe even what's implicit in what you're saying is that you're recognizing that the choice that you're making is going to be hard for them. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. So yeah, the fourth point on this slide actually kind of speaks to that, I think, is that the person who's caused harm, not only could we look deeper and say, like, sort of how did they get to the place where they're causing harm, right? Like maybe they've been harmed prior to it, but then of course the response puts them in a difficult position too of being marginalized and having to overcome that, right? So and that really brings us to the next section that I wanted to talk about, which is just looking a little bit under the surface below the action itself. And one of the things I really love about when a process is able to bring a whole person into the conversation is that justice looks really different because there's like a richness of understanding about what happened leading up to it, in terms of not just maybe that day or the hour leading up to it, but a bigger picture that helps us understand. So this section is aimed at talking about some of the negative effects of the punitive response. And one of the biggest is an emotional, a real emotional yoke that is shame. And shame is defined as something that you know, if other people saw that they wouldn't want anything to do with you, right? And so shame is a powerful predictor of harmful behavior because it signals the breakdown of social relationship. And when we are given the message that we're not wanted, it's human nature to act in more harmful ways. So, and that could be avoiding, withdrawing, or fighting, attacking others or hurting ourselves, and that's when we see like fights, you know, or cutting or dropping out. The opposite is empathy. So this is another quote: the basic psychological motive and cause of violent behavior is the wish to ward off or eliminate the feeling of shame and humiliation. And so the very responses that we, as a, you know, in most of our institutional settings, impose to try to curb harmful behavior, insofar as they create shame, have the opposite effect. I'm sure you've all heard the quote, hurt people, and that's just the idea that the pain that's not transformed is then transferred. So talking about restorative practices is really aimed at looking at this, you know, in a lot of ways the island analogy fits with schools so much better because it is a more easily defined community of people, right? And so in that setting, the relationships really matter. And this has been shown by the numbers around students, you know, involvement in school related to the climate, related to how emotionally connected they are to the school, teachers, and their peers. And so restorative practices, what we call restorative justice in the school setting, is called restorative practices because it's not just about responsive processes. It's about building, you know, relationship and community into the learning experience, so that it's a real emphasis on the social emotional aspect of human development, and that is the most powerful expression of restorative practices in the school setting, is the proactive piece. And it can look like a whole continuum of things. The most basic fundamental thing that restorative schools employ is the circle process in the classrooms. And that's the proactive community building piece. And then, of course, the responsive, which is an alternative theory about how to respond when harm occurs. And that's sort of more talking about how we approach discipline as a learning opportunity, you know, versus sort of the more exclusionary traditional policies. So here's the continuum. In the proactive end of things, which is the bulk of the work that's done in the school setting in terms of trying to transform a school to being more restorative, we have effective statements, which could be as simple as, you know, it's like the empathy with as opposed to power over. So, you know, you framing conversation with youth around your own feelings and your needs. And then dialogue circles could be in the classroom, just classroom check-in circles, can also be learning circles around curriculum, can be topical, and those are kind of ongoing. And then the more responsive end of things we have when maybe there's a conflict or things are starting to go, you know, awry, then you have restorative questions and then restorative conversations, and then at the far end of things is a much more formal process, which is where I have most of my experience. And community conferencing is one of the models of restorative practice that deals with more serious conflict. At the foundation of restorative questions, restorative conversations, and community conferencing are the same questions. What happened? How have you and others been affected? And what can be done to make it right? And so those questions can happen informally in the hallway. They can happen in the administrator's office, and they can happen in between those who are involved, and they can happen in a much more formal way with community conferencing, where we bring in parents and other community members to support that conversation. Just some examples of the implementation of restorative practices in other settings. The Homewood Center is in Howard County, and they implemented the whole school approach, which basically incorporates the continuum that I just showed you into the school. Some schools use bits of it, and there are some schools who decide they're going to transform their whole culture, and that's a much bigger project, and they've done it there. And they've seen a huge decrease in their referrals to the office, in suspensions, and dropouts. The Next Step Public Charter School in DC has also seen a huge transformation. You can see this starting in 2010. So in 2000, so they had 84 students in the 2011-2012 school year, the 457 write-ups and 53 suspensions. The next year they doubled their student body, but they implemented restorative practices, and they had a drop in write-ups to 319, 23 suspensions and 2 expulsions, with double the amount of students. The next year was even lower, 38 write-ups, 3 expulsions, and we're writing in the agreements, the 17 agreements, because those were the result of the more formal process of community conferencing, which usually results in some kind of written agreement. So the context for Restorative DC, I mentioned that I've been working in Maryland, and I'm very happy and excited to now be working with School Talk Incorporated. There's a new project this year called Restorative DC. I live in DC. I've been here for 12 years, and so I'm really excited to be working in the city that I live in. And this school year is the first year that we'll be doing some restorative practices, trainings, and support in DCPS. Some of the other programs are the ones in Maryland, which I mentioned, community conferencing programs. Also in Fairfax County, the Fairfax County Public School System has adopted restorative practices as a school-wide policy. So there's also the DC Alliance for Restorative Practices, which has 300 or so members. It's been going on for a couple of years now to bring folks together to try to push for restorative culture in both the schools and also in the justice system. This year we're partnering with DCPS and OSSI as well to get support around piloting our approach to restorative practices. There have been a number of trainings. Last year, a number of schools had some trainings from organizations that are outside of DC. And one of the things that everyone has learned is the importance of having on-site continual support after a training, and so that's what we're planning to do this school year with the schools that we're working with. So our approach to this is really working closely with the schools that we're working with ahead of time to figure out exactly where they're at, what they need, how to get from where they are to where they're hoping to get, and it's about building up the capacity inside the schools and to provide that ongoing local support. Restorative practices is something that has a lot of parallels and can go hand in hand with other, approaches like PBIS and so working to make sure that it's, complementing and really building upon the restorative things that are already happening. We have a strong component of trauma education, insofar as the way that people behave often has a lot to do with what's going on and what has gone on in their lives. The trauma piece is particularly important. And then, yeah, let me see what else. Oh yeah, the support network is just speaking to sort of a community of practice that we're cultivating, where we'll be having regular meetings for folks who are working on implementing restorative practices to come together and talk about how it's going and get support from each other. And this speaks to that as well. So I feel like maybe it would be a good time to see if there are any questions, but I can end with a quote. Relationships are all there is. Everything in the universe only exists because it is in relationship with everything else. Nothing exists in isolation. We have to stop pretending we're individuals who can go it alone. And then connection is the essence of the human experience.
Thanks so much, Holly. I think we have one or two questions. I'm going to go to Letitia first, and again, I'm having trouble finding my here we go. Here's the question box. So Letitia asks, as a charter school, how can we get connected with organizations that will help us implement sound restorative practices?
Great question. So because this year is the first year we're starting out kind of small, and we are working with, I think, about 5 schools this year. So what I'm more than happy to do is provide you with reference materials, videos, books, and links. We can be contracted for individual trainings. We can also, we're still determining the charter schools that we'll be working with this year, so we can definitely put you on a wait list for the Aussie program and meet with you and talk with you about what you're hoping for. And then, of course, put you in the candidate pool for next year if this project expands.
And also, I'll just do a quick plug right now.
And just the reference material.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Holly.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to put in a quick plug that on August 19th, Holly's going to be doing a half-day training for co-op members, and so even if you're not able to get into this year's cohort, we think that will be a great chance for schools to bring teams. We would hope that decision makers and practitioners can come to that session, because it'll be a lot more robust than a 1-hour webinar, and will hopefully give you great ideas and resources and ways to get started as we figure out how to get folks interested in doing this work connected as quickly as possible to helpers. So, and you can find that information on our website, on our PD events registration page. Please, there's plenty of space right now, so please feel free to register yourselves and hopefully bring a team of folks from your school.
Thanks. Are there any other questions? Did I answer the question that was asked?
And again, feel free to use the hand-raising icon, because we're a small group. It's very easy for me to unmute you and have you be able to have exchange with Holly, which might be a little bit easier than typing in your questions. So we'll just kind of wait to see if more questions come in, but In the meantime, I really would like to thank Holly for joining us today and sharing this information with us. We're so excited about bringing this work to DC and having experts like you to help guide our schools as they embark upon this process.
Thank you. It's really an honor, and you know, I feel very committed to the process being a partnership. You know, there's the wisdom really lies with you all because you are the ones working in the schools, and so the goal is to be supportive in terms of applying this to your circumstances and the communities that you're working with.
I don't see any more questions, but if they kind of arise as you take this information back to your school and your team, please feel free to email me and I can connect you with Holly, and we hope to see you all on the 19th. And I am going to end the webinar and thank you all for spending your time with us, and thanks again to Holly.
Thank you so much. And just one more quick thing, Julie. I'll send you a bunch of links and things like that. If folks are interested in watching videos of what the processes look like, I have some great videos from Oakland and Philadelphia and things like that to show you, so you can really see what it looks like. So I think that makes a difference sometimes versus just talking about it. So I'll make sure and get that to you.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.